keep going
It
with
is.
your story. So
So
first baby, like
we'll go
everything fell off. Second baby,
oh,
everything was kind of like weird. You know, you
very
tried,
weird.
but you were very like not attached to an outcome, but then life and the world happened and was like, well, crap. And so
Yeah.
now you're on your third baby and you're like, this time's gonna be different. What did you do differently? What
Yeah.
what was different? What was the same? How did you navigate this?
Hey, Mama Bear. Welcome to the Breastfeeding with Confidence podcast. Do you dream of bonding with your baby through exclusive breastfeeding, but worry about breastfeeding pain or low milk supply? Maybe you're struggling with breastfeeding and no one seems to have any answers. I'm Jamie, doula, international board certified lactation consultant, and mom of 5, and I have been where you are. After working through painful latches, milk supply worries, and postpartum depression, and supporting countless mothers through their breastfeeding journeys for over 8 years, I'm here to tell you breastfeeding doesn't have to be perfect to be positive. Each week, I'll share breastfeeding tips to help you prevent and overcome unexpected breastfeeding challenges so you can actually enjoy bonding with your baby. If you are ready to shut out the toxic whispers of the world, embrace your God-given intuition, and release your inner fierce mama bear, grab some coffee or your favorite herbal tea and let's dive in.
So this obviously isn't like gonna be the answer for everyone, but I became a doula. That helped. In my case, though, I felt a very deep tug and a calling to doula work. I actually thought I wanted to focus on postpartum because I thought that birth work was going to be too triggering for me, for lack of a better term. Thankfully, actually, the opposite happened. I actually do a lot more birth work. I actually had a birth yesterday, so I'm running on coffee right now. I've been able to make a lot of great connections. But again, you don't have to be a professional to do this. So this is kind of one of the things I want to drive home, and I'm sure is going to be part of our message for today is even linking up with a doula to begin with, and that doula has connections. So for our mama, like, link your support. I had talked to my cousin. I was going to a pelvic floor therapist for my third, as a part of the changes that I was making with this third birth. And she was like, oh, I never really had time to do that, but I intended to do that. Same thing with lactation, same thing with all of these providers that we need, the support team that you're building. Being, again, coming from human services, it's a big deal to build that team around you and the services that you might need. So same with my mamas when I think about them that way, and same with myself. I had to figure out what was my team. And I had actually created a checklist for moms so that they can not forget, and literally everything that you can think of that you would need when you're pregnant, postpartum, and for your baby when they're born, and how to handle that, because that can be really overwhelming, being like, oh,
Yeah.
I need to see this person, this person, this person, this person, this person. How do I fit all these appointments in? All that kind of stuff. So I created this little PDF for that because I realized how, one, mamas need to start somewhere,
Yeah.
right? And that's what I did. I literally went into my notes app and was like, I'm going to lay out all of the providers I need. And of course, lactation was one of the biggest ones that I had on there because it had been a couple of years since my second, and I had 2 traumatic C-sections. I was hoping to have a home birth VBAC this time. I was like, I can do this. I know people. And I did build a really great team. I had become really close friends with the doula who happened to be in my town, didn't even know about her, and we actually have so much in common. She was my doula, and I picked a midwife who had been a midwife longer than I've been alive. So she definitely had been through it all. She'd been through all of the transitions in the field, and she was awesome. And I'm in New York, which I didn't mention earlier. I'm in New York and I straddle the Connecticut line. So unfortunately, I couldn't have a home birth from a Connecticut home birth midwife. And there are so many great Connecticut midwives. And New York can be very limiting at times. New York has a lot of strict rules and laws, especially when it comes to birth and different things like that. But I did find this midwife that she was coming down just over an hour. I'm south of that. And I was really grateful for her support because she's, like I mentioned, she's been through the medical aspect. Knows it all. So I had my doula and my midwife. So That support was great because they had just such great experience with the two of them combined. And then I had a pelvic floor therapist, and I had picked out a local lactation consultant that I had met at a networking event. And I liked her presence, and she wasn't too far from me, just a couple towns over. And so I wanted to connect with her. And it was funny too, because I honestly didn't do a lot of preparation when it came to preparing to breastfeed. I don't know like what some of
I don't
this
think that's
was.
true. I think through your doula training and doula support, you did a lot
Well,
of
that's true.
preparation,
That's a good
and
point.
because you were
Yeah.
seeing and you were learning the things you didn't know over a period of time, instead of trying to cram it all into a one size fits all class, and
That's
that's what I
true.
always say is like taking a class, like screw taking a breastfeeding class, honestly. Like I do have a breastfeeding class, but it's part
Yeah.
of a bigger package, right? Like
Right.
it's part of a bigger support package, because a breastfeeding class doesn't teach you anything.
Yes, I did. I was able to get a lot of breastfeeding basics through my doula training. And I'm always very clear with my clients about that. I actually just had a client recently. She's due in a few weeks here herself. And she's like, "Are you able to help with breastfeeding and this and that?" And I'm like, yes and no. I mean, I told her, I'm like, I have a lot of great resources. I have lactation consultants that I trust, ones who I would be comfortable recommending to you, and things like that. Online support and information. I'm like, I have tons of that stuff. But in terms of like, I can't treat, I can't diagnose anything. I have very, very basic knowledge, which is not terrible, but I'm like, at least I can point you in the right direction. So I was very honest with her about that and where I'm at currently. Kind of goes back to that, because having like my client folders are stuffed with like, all the packets and this and that. I have a few favorite resources that I print out. I think I've even printed out yours and passed it
Oh, I
along.
love it.
So I'm like, you gotta go look at her. Long story short, I did have a lot more resources, which was great. And then I went into labor not too long ago, only just a two short months ago, and I was very, very close to having the home birth I desired. But even with all the preparation, sometimes your body just does things that you can't understand. I labored better than I did with my first two. I labored at home. My midwife came. This was like the last day of March. I had my baby April 1st, which was funny. And he's an April Fool's baby. She came in and I opted
I'm
for
not trying to joke. Until your birth felt like, oh, you got so close to your healing home birth, and then April Fools, we're going for a C-section.
You know how the saying
that's
goes,
cruel.
make plans, God laughs.
I know.
So there's that. But I'm not going to lie. Part of my birth plan was to not have my baby in March. So I was like this close. So I like just made it into April. But of course it's April Fool's. It's April 1st. So I opted for having my midwife check me because I had been laboring all day. I was clearly in active labor, and I was 8 centimeters dilated with only my TENS machine and some help of my doula when she arrived. I was like, what? Like, because I did not get to do that with my first two. I was either induced in some way. I was basically induced with both of them, even though with my second, labor did start on its own. It was not going fast enough for them. Let's just put it that way. So further interventions had been employed in that situation. With this one, I was 8 centimeters. I was like, that's great. She goes, but you're still station -2. And I was like, that's high up in the pelvis. That's still like mid pelvis. At 8 centimeters, baby should have been a lot lower, ideally speaking. And I've seen this with my clients. So I was very familiar with that understanding. I was like, yeah, he should be a lot lower. So I was like, okay, the plan was going to be, we'll work baby down a little bit, like that probably would do the trick. So I went to go take a shower, get through some contractions, freshen up a little bit. I went to the toilet, and then my water broke, because she did mention that my bags were bulging. My water broke, but it was very heavily loaded with meconium, unfortunately. In some cases, it's not a big deal. It really depends, I think, on the stage of your labor, like where your labor's at, the other factors that are involved. That meconium, you can work with it. I think if I was a lot closer to delivery, it would have been completely fine. But baby being pretty high, I think the risk, and because this was a VBAC after 2 C-sections, who knows what else was going on. Usually when meconium happens, there's to some degree of reason for baby to do it. Obviously, you can't always know the reason. A lot of OBs and nurses will say it's a cord or something is one of the possibilities. We obviously couldn't know that at that time. I was nervous because I was like, well, working baby down, being that high in the pelvis with that much meconium, I mean, my water had broke. Like, it wasn't trickling or anything. I was like going for it. I ended up opting to go to the hospital, which it wasn't part of my plan, but it was. Like, I always kind of knew in the back of my head, like, I decided to choose the first hospital that I had my first in, not the second one where I had very, very, very much more traumatic experience. They were both about the same distance away, just in different directions. So my midwife was able to call them, like just tell them the situation, to expect me. It was in the middle of the night, which was kind of nice. So it wasn't very busy. It was like a Tuesday. So it was actually very fun getting admitted to the hospital with everyone being like, "We've been waiting for you."
That's so cute. I love that you're looking at it so positively.
And it's hard. It really is. Like, let's be real. And I'm sure many moms can relate. I felt kind of, I didn't want to say I felt defeated. I just felt exhausted, really, by that point, because I'd been laboring for like 24 hours at that point.
Yeah.
But I was at home. So it was immensely better. It was
And
immensely better.
I think it speaks a lot to the fact that you can be disappointed in how things go, whether that's with breastfeeding or birth,
Yep.
but you can still have the power and confidence to make decisions that you are at peace with. So you don't have to be happy about it. It doesn't have to be easy, but you can still feel peace around it. And that is such a dramatically different experience than being pressured, making decisions out of fear, and making decisions out of just like panic and overwhelm. It's such a different thing, even if the outcome is the same.
Yes, 100%. And I think that's why I'm, and I'll probably be speaking about that on my own through my platform as well, especially with this. And it was funny because I had messaged my lactation consultant and I was like, we still need to get together, because I had been like, oh, like we were going to plan for a prenatal appointment. And I was like, I'm pretty much due, like I'm due April 5th, but I know this baby's going to come before then. I knew just by a little bit, less than a week. And so we put on the calendar to meet April 1st, just in case. And the night before, I was like, I'm in labor, probably not going to be able to meet with you tomorrow. And that was exactly what ended up happening. Long story short, I delivered in the hospital. I had a much, much better C-section experience this time around, thankfully, because I was conscious. Like I had been laboring unmedicated till 8 centimeters, but not having been induced by Pitocin, not having had an epidural. My goodness, I was so much more aware. Even though I felt like I was dying because I was like, my water had been broken, and stuff like that. But I came into the labor, like to the delivery room finally, and I had to get a spinal, which I hadn't had before because I had epidurals with the first 2, and it worked in like 2 minutes. I was like, dang, this is good. I was like, because the contractions at that point, they were really hard, I mean, in a good way, but I had already been being prepped for surgery. So the spinal worked and that felt great. So I had the baby, and they actually dropped the blue drape for me, which was nice because I hadn't had that done before. So I at least got to see him immediately after he had been pulled out of me. And I remember just crying and being like, he looks like the other 2.
Aww.
So I felt very more emotional, and I think it was in a good way It was the oxytocin that I needed. Like, I needed that. And of course, they brought him to my face and all that typical stuff. They had to sew me up. It took a little bit longer because they did discover that I was rupturing. So, which is not common. I tell my clients because they want to know my story.
Were you rupturing or did you have a window though? Sorry, this is like my whole other thing. I'm very
Yes,
passionate about VBAC, and I used to have a
I
VBAC podcast.
know. That's actually how I found you
Yeah,
originally.
that's
Was through
right.
VBAC.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and yes, and I feel the same. I'm like in the same boat as you,
Yeah,
VBAC and breastfeeding now.
because you have a window. Like there's a lot of moms that can deliver vaginally and have a window,
Yes.
and they just never knew because they didn't
Yep.
make it in.
That's why I'm very like hesitant, especially with planning for a fourth at some point, because I'm just, what can I say? I am stubborn as all heck. I am Italian and Albanian. I am German. I am stubborn. So aside from that, it's like I'm gonna figure out, because I was looking in the way that they had documented it, and they did specifically say rupture, but they did talk about it looked like there could be a window. I've been asking around. I want to get a lot of opinions on this, because even then my midwife in my last appointment with her had mentioned something about, I think she really truly thinks I had a window, and she can decipher this language better than I can. Because at first they were like, oh, if you have a fourth, you're gonna need to have a C-section at 37 weeks. Like, they were kind of already telling me, and I was like, I just kind of let them say what they had to say. And, my experience at the hospital was much better this time around. I'm just going to throw that out there. Although I did feel like they kind of,
they're still coming at it from a medical perspective.
Right. And they wanted to play the rupture like as if, like, oh my goodness, it's a good thing you came because it could have been. And I'm like, maybe not. But I was like, I didn't come in on an ambulance on a stretcher. Let's put it that way.
Right. And also,
right?
I think sometimes it's hard to know, obviously, right? Because none of us were looking at it. None of us were there in that moment.
Yep.
And I think there are a lot of doctors who are extremely compassionate and well-meaning.
Yes.
And they know that your birth plan didn't go the way that you wanted it to, so they want you to feel like your coming in was justified. So
right. Like, here's the home birth transfer.
yeah. And so it makes it more be like, okay, look, you did the right thing. That way you feel better about it. And not saying they're right or wrong in that, but it's like there's so many factors, right? Like it could be that you were absolutely rupturing. It could be that there was a window. Unfortunately, a lot of times surgeons conflate the two. A lot of studies conflate the two, and there are very distinct differences. And again, I'm like going into a whole different thing. That's a whole other conversation to have, because there are women who have had, a VBAC that turned into a CBAC, and they found a window, and then they went on to have a VBAC after 2 C-sections with no complications. Because there are things you can do to strengthen the uterus, and conventional medicine will typically say that's not possible.
Right.
So that it's just so hard to know. So I think that's, again, something we come back to is like, we have to make those decisions from that place of information and intuition, and really making informed, confident decisions at the end of the day.
Yeah. And to share all of that, because you would think, and there's a very common, it's not really a saying, but just the common consensus that most C-section moms struggle with breastfeeding, especially because, they don't have the transport through the vaginal canal. They don't get put on your chest immediately for skin to skin. Generally speaking, there are those really rare hospitals that have gentle C-sections, and they're much more open with that. And if I have to find one, I will. Generally speaking, I feel like they stack the odds against you, whether it be intentional or not. The odds do they kind of do, like, again, with the cascade of interventions. And that's the thing. I've brought this up. I've told my cousin this, that not having been medicated as much as I had been in my first 2, I think did play a big role in that. So having your birth plan, and again, things can happen. I'm not knocking anyone that's been heavily medicated. Many moms are heavily medicated and breastfeed just fine. But for me, in my case, this was my third pregnancy. I was a lot less medicated. I think, therefore, my body, my brain, and my baby were in much better communication with each other. Because even though I had to get stitched up, that golden hour really technically gets missed. It's really a golden second hour for most C-section mamas. But he came to me and he actually latched pretty well right immediately. And I think a lot of times babies do initially. I think probably for the most part, I've seen it with my clients. They just put baby right on them, and it's after that. It's continuing that. It's encouraging that. It's keeping that going. I think initially they do instinctively latch fairly well. It may take a couple tries. I'm not saying, oh, immediately, like there it is. He did latch pretty quickly. So that was encouraging. That felt really good because this time around, after going through all my past traumatic birthing and breastfeeding experiences, after learning a lot more through my doula training and meeting a lot of providers and connections and support, that I almost didn't think twice in a way. I just allowed it to do its thing in a sense. And I do think you do need a level of that, right? We talk a lot about preparing and preparation and the knowledge and the education, but we need to also allow enough of that. There is a level of let the natural do its thing, right?
Absolutely.
So we have to, how do you balance that?
I love that you brought that up because that's so much of what I try and get moms to understand. And this is like, you can have all the education in the world, but if you are addressing breastfeeding from a control focused standpoint, like point of view, which is what most people in the hospital are doing, it doesn't work. You have to have the education of knowing how to work with your baby to let those instincts lead the way, right? It's a different type of education. Like, it's not this like textbook thing. It's let's understand what their design is and how we can work with it instead of trying to control it. So I love that you brought that up because it's so true. It's like we have to just let it happen. And there are things that we can do to support that natural let it happen, right? Without intervening. And it's when we're intervening and trying to control everything that problems come up.
Right. Yes. And I think there's a level of needing to surrender in that sense because so many moms, myself included, have been so fearful of breastfeeding. And it's the same with birth in particular, where it's like you're so used to seeing and hearing about it in one way, you almost psychologically like block out the natural instincts. Our brains want to control everything else so hard when our body just wants to let it happen in a lot of ways. It's the wonderful thing about being a human. But I think similarly to my fear of birth that I had a fear of breastfeeding. Am I going to drop him? Am I going to hurt him? Am I going to be uncomfortable? I've never seen this really done before, but everyone else makes it look so easy. And so you have kind of this like society, cultural, again, like predispositions that have been planted in my brain and probably in a lot of moms' brains that in some ways you don't allow the natural to happen. And that's why you get the criticisms of like, it's not as natural and easy as you think. And it's like, well, what do you think? We've had all this other stuff like just infiltrated into our heads about breastfeeding and birth in particular. So how we really have to shift that. And that does happen with education, and that does happen with conversations like this, and having the lactation consultants. Just like any service profession, in my opinion, there is a level of like your clients need to unload on you because you have to listen to that and understand where these fears are coming from in a sense. And so I do kind of go back to that. And I think allowing myself to honestly just not even think about it in a way had helped in that initial latching and feeding. And thankfully, this time around in the hospital, I had a much better team of lactation consultants. And I'd even said to one of them, I was like, I did not have this support 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago. And they were like, yeah, like COVID sucked, basically. Like, it was rough. It was rough. And I'm like, yes, like that's like the initial comment, but you know, the nurse still didn't have to say what she said, different things like that.
Exactly, right?
But
Like, everybody
I was
wants
like,
to
I'm
blame
not
it all on
denying
COVID.
that things were terrible with probably a lot of hospitals then. Yeah, but I felt much better supported. All the nurses were much more consistent, all the LCs. Actually, one of the LCs there also has a private practice, so I recognized her from networking. So, and they were great, but I don't know. It was funny because they all, at various times, different LCs would come in and they would be like, you and your baby are like the talk of the town in like the lactation department, because you guys are doing so great. We had been breastfeeding really well, and I was determined to be out of that hospital in 48 hours, by the way. I was like, this is not happening. We are not staying this long. So I made it work. And I let it be known that I was a doula, so I wasn't like completely uninformed with the thing. So I think they actually left me alone in a lot of ways, which was good. And yeah, we just kept doing it. I mean, that was part of it. I knew I wasn't going to see my midwife until I was discharged, and I knew my lactation consultant wasn't. This was a Tuesday, Wednesday. I think I got discharged on a Thursday. Was scheduled to see my lactation consultant that Friday. So I didn't even actually have them immediately, but I had them on cue. Like, I had them on
But you
deck.
knew they were there, right?
I
You
knew they were
that
there.
support system was there. You weren't just going into it blind, thinking like, "Oh God, how am I going to figure this out? I've got to piece it all together." Like, you knew they were there, and that is half the battle.
Yes. And also, yeah, before I forget, it's when I was in recovery, like my doula and my midwife were still there. They were kind of just rotating in and out to check on me until I was gonna go into my postpartum room. So they were like, my midwife was there, and even though she's not a lactation consultant, she's got like 40 years of experience. Like, so she was like, she knew the basics and she knew them very well. So she was able to confirm, like, he looks really great. He's got a good latch. Like, you could hear that he was swallowing, he was eating. And so it gave me a good starting point. And yes, that's exactly what it was. I still knew they were there. I still had the support, and I had them on deck for when I came home. And thankfully the care in the hospital really helped. So that's why I also really encourage clients and any moms. I encourage all families, like, see if you can connect with the hospital's lactation team before you go into labor. If you can get it, like, at least can you be like, I just want to, like, I want to know the names, or I just want to know who's in charge. Like, is there a way I can even meet with someone beforehand? Because they might be possible with hospitals. I don't know if people really try to do that, especially if you're going to deliver in a hospital, because that disconnect can happen right then and there for some families. And
all it takes is one nurse, one comment, one lactation consultant, and I see it all the time. Unfortunately, local to me, it's really bad, and it's one comment. It's always one comment that they'll say to these moms, and it just completely unravels even the most confident women. And that's why I'm always saying, like, you need to have that backup plan of good support.
Yeah, I've heard some doulas have heard from some lactation consultants that just keep trying comment. And I'm like, how can you professionally even say that? That's like me in labor. Just keep trying. Just keep trying. You have to do things. You have to help. You have to.
I've had clients local to me. I know. No, seriously. I've had clients local to me who are like, I'm like the fifth person they're seeing between midwives, pediatricians, multiple lactation consultants. And they're like, yeah, well, this one came into the hospital and straight up said most women can't breastfeed. A lactation consultant said that in the hospital to a new mom. No. Most women can't breastfeed. And then like the next person was like, oh, just try harder. Just pray more. Just pray more. And I'm like, I love that you want to have a faith-centered approach. I truly do. Right. But there's a level of, we have to be a little more reasonable here.
There's this thing called works. Doing work. Right? Like,
well, I guess that's a whole other conversation.
That is. Anyway, but it's true. Like, yes, like, and that's kind of part of my story as well, where it's like, yes, have the confidence, build the confidence, have the optimism, You need to have that because the brain plays such a role in how we perceive things and how we achieve, right? So it's that, but what work can you do to continue that to happen?
Yeah.
Right? A baby just doesn't magically appear at your boob and start eating. Like, you have to learn positioning. You have to learn, I learned how to side lie in bed. Oh my gosh, is that a game changer?
It is. Nobody wants to listen to me.
And people have their opinions about co-sleeping and bed sharing. Thankfully, my husband is like, I will do whatever I can to get the baby to shut up kind of attitude. Probably like most husbands or dads. But he's like, if that means like giving up some sleeping space, we will do it. Because I have to tell you, my midwife actually showed me that because she had come just before my lactation consultant, which was great because we got all of that kind of handled. And I've been able to sleep so much better. So just to circle back.
No, it is amazing. I remember after my 5th, people were like, how are you guys sleeping? And we're like, great, because the baby's in bed with me with our mouth full of titty and sleeping. So we're sleeping great. There's a lot of other stuff going on. The house is a disaster. We don't have any food, but we're sleeping great.
That's what I mean. And to circle back to mental health, people are like, how are you holding up? And I was like, better the third time around for me. And even my husband, he feels so weird about not having gotten up at night. And it's funny, I told him, like, I don't want you to get up at night. I'm like, and he did so much getting up at night and helping me with the first 2. I was like, we deserve to do this in a way. And I'm like, this is so much better for our mental health. And him and I talk about that all the time. We're still working on our hiccups, like me not being home, when I have to go to a birth or meet a client. Like, I can't take my baby everywhere all the time. So we're figuring that part out. But once you get into the groove, you get it, you figure it out. That's where my occasional pumping has been coming in. And since my baby is primarily nursing and I'm occasionally pumping, I'm not worried about supply, at least not at this point. It's one of those things that we'll figure it out as we go. And that's why the lactation support is necessary and helpful, because as I adjust to different challenges and different things that come up in life, I'm trying to figure out where nursing and pumping fit into that. So that's a little bit different. And so we're navigating that. But overall, I'm pretty much home with my kids for the most part. So I nurse. Even as we were on this call, I was nursing in the beginning of this conversation, and my babysitters, thankfully, I have a lot of support in that area. And that's been a big difference too. And having my babysitter, having my in-laws down the street and my parents very close by, we have a lot of family support. And I know that's not everyone's situation. I can't speak for everyone, but we can help. And that's why having a doula can be really helpful in kind of getting that flow as well. So really lining that up and at least planning it out or thinking about it, laying it out, and then figuring out what's going to work in your life situation. So my mental health has been so much better this time around. And you get the hormones. You get the hormones from breastfeeding. Postpartum hormones are crazy. You're haywire for a little bit there before it takes some time before things regulate.
Yes,
and if you're breastfeeding, right. And if you're breastfeeding, different hormones regulate longer at different times. And if you wean quickly or go straight to formula, right? So, and I haven't been suffering from postpartum migraines like I was with my first 2. I did suffer pregnancy migraines this time around, which was a little bit tough. But taking proper supplements, eating well. So this is part of that preparation for breastfeeding. And you can even do that, start that while you're pregnant, and God willing, even before you're pregnant. And that was a big difference for me as well. I had lost 20 pounds between my first and my second, and I'm only 4'10". So I really can't afford to have the extra weight on. I really can't. I look like a meatball, like I belong on Jersey Shore. You don't want that. So let's get that out of the picture here. I need to, I really needed to take care of my health basically. So I did that, and I put in as much work as I felt I could during pregnancy. I took the supplements I needed and took them properly. I didn't just take things willy-nilly. I did have.
And when you take care of yourself like that, when you take care of yourself like that, a lot of people don't realize that actually like helps regulate your nervous system too.
Yes.
So then when these things are challenging, you're more resilient in being able to handle them and face them and work through them. And I think that's something that's very overlooked. People think like, oh, she just like wants to push supplements or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, like full body wellness makes a difference in how you handle these challenges that we're going to face. And I feel like birth and breastfeeding just kind of like exploits all your weaknesses, right? Like it just like uncovers everything. You either have to face it or try and dig it or bury it back down, and it's going to come up eventually. So prepare yourself to be able to handle those things
and I did up. I saw a chiropractor. That's a really big support in nervous system regulation. I really highly recommend like prenatal chiropractor care as well. That was my biggest too, was pelvic floor and chiropractor, having the combination of that. But again, also to help with regulation, to help with labor preparation, and I think overall wellness, and just having that confidence going into it, it really helped again with the breastfeeding, because I just felt like I think I can do this, even though my outcome wasn't what I wanted. It really didn't matter, because the goal to breastfeed had already been there before the outcome, right? So it's just a matter of knowing that I had taken care of myself and continue to do so. And one of those other big things, like I used to get told all the time, you need to eat. You're so hangry. I'm so hangry all the time, because I wasn't eating very well, even before I was pregnant, before I started working on my health. And when you're breastfeeding, like you need to eat. And it's another thing mentally that like you have to be prepared for. If you're someone who is on strict diets or has like an eating disorder, things like that. And obviously I'm not a professional and I can't speak to it, but it does make me think about that, how much more difficult that can put on you to try and breastfeed, because there is supply and demand. And so you have that physical supply and demand from the baby, the signaling, but your body needs the energy also to make and produce this, right? So it needs the signal, but then it needs the energy. It needs the goods, just like that's how we survive, right?
And
so you need to
like
eat.
talking about that,
drink.
I think a lot of people hear that and their response is, oh, I can just eat whatever I want. But people don't realize too that like eating a balanced diet really is the key, because when I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, I am not losing any weight breastfeeding. I thought I could just eat whatever I wanted and the weight was going to fall off. Right. And I'm like, you're surviving off cookies and cakes and junk food. You're not fueling your body. And what a lot of people don't understand too is that when we fuel our body, quote, fuel our body with junk food that we're trying to like pass off as, oh, well, the calories get burned. What we're not looking at is how that food actually is influencing our body, specifically like insulin and blood sugar. And if you have insulin resistance, that can actually make it harder for you to produce breast milk. And people don't understand that. And doctors are not looking at insulin resistance, especially not in postpartum women. No. And it's like, I see this on a regular basis with my clients where they're not making milk for some unexplained reason. And we're like looking at their diet. Like that's the first thing we do is like, let's do a food log. Let's look at your diet and let's get some blood work. And we find that they are loading up on carbs because it's easy. It's easy, right? And
look, I'm not going to sit here and preach that I'm eating perfectly now.
Same, right?
I have to remind myself.
It is so easy to load up on carbs because it's convenient, but they're loading up on carbs and they're not getting enough fiber. And then we look at it's funny because what I see a lot, I'm not gonna say always, but what I see a lot is we get their blood work back and everything looks like it's within range, but we start looking at it in connection to each other. And it's not, specifically the insulin and glucose. They're both in range and normal. But when you look at them, there's a scale, it's called like the HOMA-IR. It measures for insulin resistance. And there's like different levels. Like if you're in this level, you're fine. If you're in this level, you're borderline. If you're in this level, you're insulin resistant. This level is diabetes, right? So we kind of get there. And it's like their numbers are fine individually. You look at this scale and they're not, like their body is just and they're producing all this prolactin and not making milk. And we're like, that's because your body literally cannot respond to the prolactin because your insulin levels are off. And if we shift how you're eating, that can help address this insulin levels. I'm sorry, I'm going off on like a whole other tangent, but it's like,
no, but
it's deep level, high level stuff that people don't know. And as a mom, honestly,
Right.
you shouldn't know. It's not your job to know it all, but your
Right.
doctor doesn't know it either a lot of times. And so they're just going to shrug their
Yes.
shoulders and not give you the support you deserve. And that's why I
Mm-hmm.
advocate so fiercely for that good quality lactation support. And that's not always going to be it's not going to be every lactation consult. They're just not
Yeah.
trained. Like I was not trained to look at that off the bat. Like that came
Right.
from additional training, continuing education, learning how those things come
Mm-hmm.
together, working
Yep.
with moms who had these unexplainable situations, and like we have to bring it together. And so I'm sorry, I'm like going off
Yeah.
on a tangent, but you brought up the
No,
food,
yeah.
and it's like it's so important because everybody thinks like, oh, I can just eat whatever I want because breastfeeding burns more calories, and it's like you can, and you probably like a lot of people will still make milk, but some people
Right.
won't, and it's not just a matter of eating more necessarily, it's eating well.
Yeah.
Right? We have to fuel
100%.
and nourish our bodies. We have to take care of our bodies. It is so important to take care of our bodies. And if you're giving your baby breast milk because you want what's best for them, like do what's best for you and take care of you. It's like the oxygen mask on the plane, right? Like you
Yeah.
have to take care of yourself if you want to take care of your baby. And most people in our age group, we were not taught how to take care of ourselves. We were not taught how to eat well and eat balanced,
Nope.
you know, and then we have
on
this
McDonald's, Skittles,
exactly,
well, you name it.
exactly. And we have this fed is best mentality that's constantly being
Yep.
pushed. And that translates beyond formula, in my opinion. Like that
Yes.
translates to us like, oh, well, we're eating. So that's all that matters. I made a post on Threads about this today that I'm sure is going to
Mhm.
get people upset. It's like we have an obesity epidemic. And
We
people are
do.
going to look at that and
Yeah.
think, oh, it's there's no malnutrition. People are well fed. They're obese. No, we're obese because we're so malnourished, and people like
Yeah.
don't understand that you can be malnourished and obese. And that is
Yeah.
our country is poorly nourished, poorly fueled, extremely obese. And it's I'm sorry.
Yep.
I'm
We look, girl, we're on the same page here. So, but that's part of the reason why I wanted to at least kind of mention that, because and it's the same mindset in pregnancy, like, and even my midwife, like, she had to remind me. It's like, she's like, how has your nutrition been? And I'm just like, I like popcorn a lot. I still do. That's my guilty pleasure, is popcorn before bed. Thankfully, it's actually not the worst snack you can eat, because I like pop it fresh and use real Irish butter and stuff like that. But you can get carried away at times, and I had to remind
Yeah.
myself, like, it's the same thing in pregnancy. So the same goes for postpartum, right? Like, you have to nourish, you have to have that protein, carbs are okay, not too much of it. Like, you need to, where are you getting your carbs from? You don't want all these empty
fat.
carbs.
Eat fat.
Yeah.
Do not be afraid of the fat. Eat all the
Oh my
fat.
gosh. Yeah, especially like eat that steak. Have those eggs, have, the avocado is great fat. It's the same thing. Like, and I worked with an amazing health coach. I would love to shout her out, but I don't know if I should, but she's amazing. And I worked with her virtually, actually. So to have like some support in some way to do that.
Yeah.
So and lactation consultants do help with those things as well. So that's why it's very, important in my mind to keep, it's a whole picture, as you mentioned earlier. Like, you need to kind of figure out where to connect the dots for some of these mamas, and that's why looking and reflecting on how my breastfeeding journey is going, I do have a goal of 1 year. I would really love to try and hit that. I don't know if that's like too ambitious after having not breastfed before, but I just keep telling
it's
myself,
not
don't
too
worry.
ambitious. Yeah, there's
I
moms
know.
do it with their first. They didn't breastfeed before. It's not too
Yeah.
ambitious. You've got the confidence. You've got the support.
Yeah, I'm like, you know what? Don't worry about it. Like, I do. I have the support. I got my lactation consultant to come whenever I need her, which has been great, because she's been doing weighted feeds.
Just don't get pregnant at 7 months.
And no, that's the only thing. I did really great after the second. I went over about 2.5 years, which normally I'm totally not against having kids really close together. In my case, after having 2 C-sections, it's different. If I had not had C-sections, I probably would have tried a lot quicker. But I knew that there's always a chance of rupture. There's always a chance of something, as with anything in life. For me, I needed to wait a little bit longer, and it was good, because people go back and forth about, oh, my health, like, do you wait? Depends on kind of what camp you fall in when it comes to family size.
No.
They're still 3 years apart, but
Yeah, no, I think that's hard too, because I have that conversation a lot with moms who are very open to life, which I mean, obviously I have 5 kids. We do NSP, like I get it.
Yep.
But a lot of moms don't understand that if your goal is to exclusively breastfeed for a year and you're getting pregnant 6 months postpartum, you're not going to reach that goal of exclusively breastfeeding for a year because your body is going to prioritize the pregnancy. And can you still breastfeed? Yes, but it's not going to be able to be your baby's primary nutrition in 99% of situations. And I think that's just, you know, it is like, I fully believe that that's a whole other conversation. Because sometimes there are some theories out there that insulin resistance can play a role in early return of fertility while breastfeeding, because people are always asking, well, how come some people get their cycles back really early, others don't get their cycles for 2 years, right? And so there are some theories about that playing a role there too. And it's just, it comes back to like, yes, we may have been designed a certain way, but we live in a fallen world where that design does not always work perfectly. And so we have to learn how to work with it. And so we have to make those decisions from an informed standpoint instead of just throwing our hands up. And I mean, there is something beautiful about surrendering, right? There's something absolutely beautiful about that. But we also have to be intentional with our decisions, because life does just happen to us, but it also doesn't, right? I'm sorry, I'm going off on like a whole philosophical thing here now too. I feel bad. I'm rambling, but I appreciate your story so much. And you've just brought up so many important things that I don't know if everybody considers, or I don't know if everybody sees as being connected until they're in your position where they're looking back. And so I want these moms who are listening, if they are a first-time mom or they're a second-time mom who's like you and they're like, I didn't breastfeed my first, I want this to work this time. I want them to hear these things and be like, oh, there's a lot more to it than I realized. And that doesn't make it unattainable.
Exactly.
Right. Because you're learning that as you're going, you're learning all these like nuggets of wisdom from going through it. So hopefully they're hearing this, and instead of being overwhelmed with all the information, it's like, okay, there's a lot more to it. And that doesn't mean I can't do it. It just means I need somebody to guide me through it. And that's okay too.
Yeah. Nope, that's exactly it. And I'm so grateful with all of the support that I've seeked and have been offered and given. And that goes beyond the professional. I really shout out my cousins, because we're the 3 oldest girls out of all the cousins, and we've had kids and they've been breastfeeding, and they're passionate about breastfeeding and breast milk, and they just want to be there for me. So I have, you know, family to just kind of send random things about my feeding journey to, and my dad not being, I may have already traumatized him once accidentally, but just like being able to be comfortable, you know, in your skin breastfeeding as well. And that's important. I've learned to breastfeed at church. I've learned to breastfeed at the park. I've learned to breastfeed. Sometimes you just gotta whip it out. And that's okay. Like in my car, which is actually much more comfortable doing that in the parking lot. And just not being shy, you know, learning different positions, but sticking with the ones that work for you. You don't have to be a master at every single breastfeeding position. You know, just being realistic in a way too. You can be optimistic and have goals, but still be realistic about your situation and what you end up being comfortable with. So having that support surrounding me to make me feel like I can do it, I think has made such a difference. And I'm enjoying it. I really am. And I think that's something I never thought I would say. I'm enjoying breastfeeding for my mental health. Like, this is great.
I love it. And it is possible. It is possible to enjoy it if you've struggled. It is possible to enjoy it if you, quote, failed the first 2 times. Like, it's not like nothing is set in stone. It is. I've had moms that have IGT and cannot make enough milk for their baby, but they still breastfed for 9 months and had that beautiful bonding experience. And I always say it doesn't have to be perfect to be positive, but you're not going to know what your options are if the only people you're turning to are telling you fed is best, start formula. Like,
it doesn't.
Formula might be part of your journey, and that's okay if it's part of your story. But like you said, like, you're not necessarily, quote, exclusively breastfeeding from the standpoint of babies at breast all the time. You work. So your baby has to go bottle to breast. And that is possible. It is possible when we have the right support, when we have the right understanding. And that's what I want moms to know and understand. And I feel like we have to say it over and over and over. And that's okay. And I'm going to keep saying it over and over and over. It's possible. All of it is possible with the right support. Where moms can find you, just to follow your story and other wisdom that you have to share, because I think your story is so inspiring. I have been rooting for you. Like, I have been rooting for you from the start. I think we did a live together before you even told people you were pregnant, right? And
yes, it was very early on. It's been a while. Yeah, I was like, oh no, but that's okay.
Yeah, no, it's
and
like,
and I did.
You've come this far. I'm just like, I love it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm Nicole Christensen, and I am a doula, and I own Holystic Maternity Care. And you can find me on Instagram.
And that's holistic with a Y, like holy,
yes.
holy holistic. I always say in my head, I'm like, holy holistic.
Yes, I'm a faith-based doula, particularly. It's holistic_maternity_care on Instagram. And I have a website, holisticmaternity.care. And that's primarily where I post and share. It's Instagram life for me. And I do have a checklist PDF that I put out on building your birth support team, your postpartum support team, and just a little extras in there. So we'll share that with you guys when we get a
link
chance.
that. Yes, we'll definitely link that in the show notes, because I want people to have that, because that is so important. And I recently did an interview with a pelvic floor therapist. So when you brought that up, I was like, yes, check the box.
Yep.
Like, yes. Like, I just want moms to hear over and over how important this like well-rounded team really is. It's about so much more than just your OB or midwife at the end of the day.
Exactly. So thank you so much for your time and having me.
Thank you for your time, and thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your story and being so vulnerable and just opening up. I think it's really going to inspire a lot of moms, and I just really appreciate you.
I'm just grateful. Thank you so much.
All right, Mama Bear, that is a wrap for today. If this episode helped you feel a little more confident or a little more prepared for breastfeeding, can I ask you a quick favor? Go ahead and leave me a review. It helps other moms find this podcast and join us in this amazing community of fierce and confident Mama Bears. And hey, if you know a friend who could use some encouragement or real talk about pregnancy, breastfeeding, and all things motherhood, share this episode with her. You've got this, Mama Bear. Trust your instincts, stay fierce, and I'll catch you in the next episode.